no other words are necessary for me to introduce our NEA president, Lily Eskelsen Garcia.
I am so impressed with myself. That is just amazing. And yay, let's talk about racism. That is never an applause line, you know, ever, ever, ever. But I want to thank Larry and Janie and Vicki and Katie and especially Miguel, who is relentless. It's like, you're coming, you're coming, you're coming, you're coming, you're coming. 3 years, he said, I need you on this calendar. I need you to come. And so I thank you. Y gracias a todos por venir para esta conversación de la educación y de la justicia. We are here to talk about the connection of education and justice, because when you talk about racial justice, it's always so easy. Everyone always agrees on everything you have to say. And no, you know, there will be people who say, we're going to talk about education, or we're going to talk about racial justice, as if there was not a connection. And that's what we have to talk about. And I feel perfectly qualified to talk about this because I am a 6th grade teacher from Utah, where diversity means you found a Presbyterian. And I am also the president of the National Education Association, the largest freaking union in the country. And I am the first Latina to ever hold this position. Yay, yay, yay. And the only thing that I would correct about Larry's very sweet introduction is I am totally full of myself. There is nothing humble about me. I am a fabulous teacher. You would want your kid in my 6th grade. You would want to be 12 years old again if you could be in my 6th grade. And I have taught suburban kids who never missed a meal. I've taught homeless kids. I've taught foster kids waiting for family in a special place called the Christmas Box House. These are hard to place foster kids who live in residential care. And I was one of their teachers. I've taught kids who don't speak English. I've taught gifted and talented kids. I have taught gifted and talented homeless kids who don't speak English. I have taught white Mormon kids and black Muslim kids and brown Catholic kids, and I taught Sunday school at the Unitarian Church where we pray to whom it may concern. I think let that one sink in. All right, we're just very open-minded. We love everybody. But I think it's important to have an educator, to have a teacher who actually understands the diversity of the communities, of the children that are counting on us, because we have to talk about these things together. When I was sitting at this lovely table, and you saw my book that I brought, and you said, oh, a well-loved book. I can tell this is a well-loved book. Let me tell you why I brought Hello, Mexico to you, as I talk about why they come together. Mexicans are great sweepers and cleaners. Even in the poorest dirt floor hut, the housewife or one of her daughters sprinkles and sweeps the floor and front door yard every morning. Employees do likewise in stores, restaurants, and even office buildings. But beyond the broom's end, the effort stops. Trash is allowed to litter streets, sidewalks, parks. Mexicans are just so clean and no cleaner. Indians are superstitious. They call themselves Christians, but they refuse to let go of the old beliefs. They are unpredictable. They do things in a certain way because their grandfathers did. They follow the same routine every day. Then suddenly they break out and become wild men. They get drunk and fight, or they join a revolution and become killers. What I want you to know is this is property of the El Paso Public Schools. It was written the year I graduated from high school in 1894. And then right after it is on indefinite loan to Cathedral Catholic High School. So once they finished using it up in El Paso Public Schools, they passed it on to the Catholic schools as a donation. This is an artifact of institutional racism. How many layers of racist decisions, including the committee in Texas that approved this, the teachers who were given training on how to teach this. And by the way, if you like Hello Mexico, you'll love Hello Brazil and Hello Venezuela and Hello South America by the same author. It's connected. It's connected. And let me say that as a teacher, I have done my homework. The history of our beloved country has never, never in its centuries achieved racial justice in education. Not from the Mayflower to yesterday. Half our founding fathers were slaveholders in states where you could go to prison for teaching a black slave to read. Racial justice education. Not everyone gets that link, but we have to talk about them together. Because, as you said, are we a union? Are we fighting for education rights? Or are we a social justice organization? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. And it's harder than most of us would think. You were attracted to come in here on a Saturday. You are not normal. You know that in your hearts. Normal people are out there, you know, like grocery shopping today or deciding what movie they're going to go to. And you are here because you get it. I'm not going to be explaining anything to you you don't already get. What I'm hoping is if we start talking about it, that you'll be more comfortable talking about it to folks who don't get it, to folks you know will just squirm when you want to talk about something that deals with race. And the first thing they need to understand is that we are in a system that for centuries has been intentionally designed by people who sat in offices and said, how do we make sure some kids get everything they need? Because they're going to be the leaders. They're going to be the ones that are going to be our doctors and our politicians and our business leaders. And then some kids will get a pretty good education. They're going to be the worker bees. And then some kids get an education that's an insult to the word education. Those will be the kids that will be cleaning up after us. Someone has to do that. They get an education that's an insult to their humanity. The people who put the system in place had this belief that the white race was naturally superior to other races. That's kind of a hard thing to say. That because we define Black, Latino, Asian Pacific Islander, Native American, very rarely does a white person have to define themselves by their race. They don't think of themselves as white people. They think of themselves as normal people. And everyone else defines themselves as not white. So here you have these folks in great power who say Latinos are that, Asians are that, Native Americans are that. And they should aspire to be white. And because we are superior, we are naturally, scientifically more capable, more intelligent. Whether or not they actually said those words out loud, it's how they thought. And the result was what we have. And what was the opposite of white? Black. And so where everyone else knew their place, the black race was on the bottom. Based on that racism, this culture developed in our country. It was a culture of white superiority, black and brown inferiority, and they constructed an entire system, institutions of justice, education, institutions that simply reflected that scientific fact. Why would you care about access to educational opportunities when you really believed that students of color were simply not smart enough to take advantage of higher level classes that were going to get you into a good college, that would be cruel for them because they would fail and it would just be a waste of resources. And so while people may not have said those words out loud, systems were developed. Without our consent, we didn't develop them as educators. We inherited them, and we inherited them after generations that were designed to advantage some and disadvantage others. The way we fund our schools, which teachers are hired to give advanced placement classes, and which teachers are hired to give remedial classes, who gets arts and the sports, who gets field trips and AP calculus, and who gets test prep and memorize and spit something back on a standardized test, and for-profit charters. All of those things today are still divided among racial lines. Brown versus the board did not disrupt institutional racism. They simply got more creative. It got more invisible. Okay, so we can't have segregated schools by law, but we'll find other ways. And if we can't be comfortable saying these things out loud, in the same way that we're comfortable calling out the problems with standardized test scores or why privatizing public schools is a mistake. Everybody's comfortable talking about that, but as soon as you talk about race, it hurts. Our union, the National Education Association, took a giant leap forward by speaking the truth out loud with that resolution on white supremacy culture and institutional racism that continues to manifest itself in our public schools, continues to limit opportunities for people of color, and we said it out loud. And 10,000 people at our insane representative assembly. Anyone ever been to that? It causes brain damage. It really does. It makes you run for office, you know? It makes you run for stuff. But it surprised me how hard it was as that came to a nationwide group of advocates, every bit as committed to their students and to social justice as all of us sitting in this room. But it made them so uncomfortable. Certain folks, their skin was crawling, and it was hard to talk about it, and it's still hard. One of my colleagues, a woman who had served on the board of directors before you, Miguel, a woman who had been teaching for years, who was a strong social justice warrior, she came up to me. She had tears in her eyes as we were debating this. And when we finished, she said, "Lily, this makes me feel like I made a mistake being born white, like I've done something wrong, and it's not fair." She said, "I have black kids and brown kids. I teach in one of the most disadvantaged neighborhoods. You know how much I fight for my students. I don't see color. I see their poverty. This is about poverty. Why can't we be talking about poverty? Why does this have to be about race?" And I loved this woman, and I put my arms around her and I whispered in her ear, we have to talk about this because it's so hard for you to talk about this. If you can't talk about this, you can't solve the fundamental problem that is causing their poverty. It's not that they can't get a good job. It's fundamental. They are being held back, and people are using public schools to oppress people of color. And it's this way everywhere I go. We can talk about income inequality. We can talk about how the system is rigged to advantage folks who already have so much, who are already wealthy, how the rich are getting richer, how the middle class is being held down. We can have open debates, whether or not you're rich, middle class, or poor. People are so comfortable talking about income inequality. Nobody feels that they're being personally attacked. But when we talk about a system that is rigged to advantage white people, regardless of their income, regardless of their gender, that it is rigged, that when you walk in the room, people make certain assumptions about you when you're white, and they make other assumptions about you. If you have an accent, if your skin is black or brown. I know that this woman felt like she was being told. Someone handed something to you. You didn't merit it. You're being accused of doing something wrong or holding someone down. And I know that that's what makes this such an uncomfortable conversation. What I want to say is it's okay to be uncomfortable. Talking about something that we rarely talk about. It's inevitable that it will make you uncomfortable. But what I've found is the more you start to talk about it openly, in very mixed groups, the more you call it out, the more comfortable you get. The more you realize, oh, this isn't about me. This is about the structure around us. This is about what has been the air we breathe. It's become invisible to all of us, oppressed or not oppressed. And until we get comfortable saying, why am I having trouble with funding public schools, just at the same time that we have a higher population of black and brown students in those public schools than ever before. Gee, I wonder if it has something to do with it. The progressive movement, the labor movement, activists, the great disruptors of injustice have always included caring, innovative educators. Too many of us still have a blind spot when it comes to race and racism. And every time we fail to call it out, every time we fail to acknowledge that it's hardwired into this system, every time we're afraid to say its name, every time we refuse to talk about something that makes us uncomfortable, we become complicit in its continuation. Many people are fine talking about the institutional racism that constructed a system of justice, a system of prisons. We're okay with talking about income inequality, or retirement insecurity, or housing, or healthcare. I'm here as a teacher, as an educator, because I believe the most insidious racism of all is the one that denies a public education. The formula for all institutional oppression, to keep the oppressor in power and to hold down the oppressed that they would deny power to, is always the same. You suppress democracy. You make sure that certain people have no political voice. You suppress labor unions. You don't want a thriving middle class. You want people who are frightened that if they are not obedient, their families will suffer, they will lose their jobs. But above all, you suppress education. It has worked through millennium. You want to keep women in their place, you make sure they can't go to college. You want to suppress the poor, oppress immigrants, the disabled. American Indians were forced into boarding schools, taken from their families, and put in boarding schools where they could squeeze the Indian culture out of them and train them to be white. You make it against the law for an enslaved black person to learn to read, and for emancipated black people, oh, well, you make sure that they are in segregated schools, that you design purposefully will be separate and unequal, where they will feel every day their inferiority, their inferior place, where you will breed that into them from kindergarten. When this suppression goes on so long, it becomes a part of your world. It appears to all of us, oppressed or not, to be normal. That generation after generation is raised to see this is just the way the world is. There are no problems to solve. This is just the way it is, and especially in education. The secret sauce to successful systemic racism is when everyone sees it and it looks normal. These schools have counselors and librarians and computers and AP everything, and sports and theater and dance and music and French classes. And those schools don't have any of those things. They have remedial classes. They're given for-profit charter schools. Good luck. And yes, these schools are mostly in upper middle class white neighborhoods, and those schools are mostly in black and brown communities. But you see, the system explains that's just a coincidence. That's not racism. See, funding comes from property taxes, and in richer neighborhoods, they generate more money, and so those kids get more, not because of racism, but because of property taxes. It's natural that these kids will have more, and these kids will have less. Except that there's nothing natural about tax policy. It's not photosynthesis. It's not a chemical reaction, you know? There is nothing more man-made than how you collect taxes and how you use them. It is the most intentional man-made part of our political system, and the result we have today is segregated schools. Segregated by black and brown and white communities. Not much different than before Brown versus the board. These are separate systems. They are unequal by design, and it is not normal. But it seems normal because of the implicit bias that exists in every single one of us. The implicit bias that this just seems normal. Let's consider Donald Trump. Yeah, I know we just had breakfast, but work with me. From day one, candidate Trump coming down that stupid escalator. Mexicans are rapists, they're thieves, they're drug dealers, they're murderers. And then comes the worst part of that rant to me. The worst part was this sentence. And this is a quote. And some, I assume, are good people. Some, meaning an exception to the rule that he just stated. And even worse, I assume. I assume meaning, well, who could be sure? Maybe all of them are bad people. But I assume some of them are good people. You assassinate the character of all when you're not sure that even some of them are good people. This is not an example of implicit bias. This is an example of pure explicit racism that we hear coming out of this man's mouth every time he takes a breath. When you just say racist things, when you say the problem is we don't have enough immigrants from Norway. Could you make this up? Implicit bias is maybe more profound and maybe more dangerous because it's invisible. It's so easy to see explicit racism. Implicit bias is in all of us. It's in me. It's in Larry. It's in Miguel. It's in all of us. It's in 3-year-olds. My husband Alberto and I were visiting our granddaughter. Alberto is ELLH. He's an English language learning husband. We've been married for a vast 6 years. And he gets frustrated when he runs out of English words. And it just, starts coming out in Spanish. And here we were speaking Spanish in front of our little 3-year-old Princesita and her friend Charlie. And so all of a sudden they're hearing us lapse into Spanish. And I'm saying, pero mi amor, tú sabes que siempre tengo razón y siempre tú estás equivocado. You don't need to know what that means. It's just we were having a fight and I was winning, okay? And all of a sudden Charlie says, stop it. Talk normal. And we started laughing. And then I stopped laughing. He was angry. This little 3-year-old, he was angry. He was hearing something that didn't sound right to him. And I remember I had a conversation when I was teaching 6th grade, and there were more and more immigrant families moving into the little suburb in Salt Lake City where I taught. And I was scolding my mom because here I was a 6th grade teacher. My mom's from Panama. She never taught us Spanish. And I'm sitting here going, Mom, why couldn't you have taught us Spanish when my brain worked? And and I said, the principal would be waxing my car if I were bilingual. And all of a sudden I looked over and she was crying. And she said, you don't understand. I thought I was protecting you. When I would speak Spanish, I could see it made people angry. Just like that little 3-year-old. It made people angry. And by the way, I speak Spanish now because she shamed me into, but you're a teacher, all teachers can learn. You know that, you can take classes. Don't you believe that you can learn it? Okay. And I speak Spanish bastante bien. It's true, and I recommend my method, which is foolproof. Marry a Mexican. I am just telling you, that is so much cheaper than Rosetta Stone. Implicit bias hits us with what appears normal and what doesn't appear normal. And remember, when it's an implicit bias and something doesn't feel normal, you don't think, hey, how interesting, this is really different. No, you get angry. You feel like something's wrong. Like something's wrong. Our brains are designed to categorize the thousands of things that happen to us every single day. It is scientific that we have to put things into categories based on our experience. This gave us a good experience. This gave us a bad experience. I'm never going to do that again. If anything looks like that, I'm not going to do it. Oh, this was fun. I can't wait to do that again. Anything that looks like that, I'm going to think is fun. I'm going to be open to it. So implicit bias, you categorize things, including the way you see a person. And what seems normal to you can have dire consequences for the students that you serve. What seems normal to you about a student you see based on their culture, based on the color of their skin? Implicit bias may decide which of your colleagues you really want to work with. Implicit bias could lead you literally to judge someone in a certain way if you were on a jury. Implicit bias could determine who you think is capable, honest, lazy, if you were to hire somebody. For a teacher, it might affect how you treat a student who broke a rule. Which student you say, well, you broke the rule, but you deserve a second chance because we all make mistakes. And which student you say, I need to make an example of you. You don't get a second chance. To tackle institutional racism, you have to be aware of every part of the system. And part of the system was designed to make us feel certain things were normal. And that means we all have that implicit bias. This is nature telling me I've been talking too long. But all of that is what needs to be disruptive. All of that is what needs to be dismantled. And being self-aware of your own implicit bias is the first step. Knowing your own responsibility to be aware. Now that doesn't mean that you can cure. Oh, you are so sweet. Oh. And does anyone know the Heimlich maneuver? Because I will be aspirating this. I know I will. But think about it. You can't erase your own implicit bias. It's there. But if you're aware of it and you have a decision to make about who gets what or how you're going to treat a student, you might take a deep breath and say, now let me check the bias I may have. Let me check to see if I'm really thinking about this. And you'll go an extra mile and not just go with your gut feeling. You'll actually start to be aware and make different kinds of decisions. Being aware of what's in your own heart and the profound trust that is placed in you as an educator to always think of the best interest of that child. But institutional racism will not be eradicated by increasing the number of individuals with good hearts. My good heart, my good intention will not get my students the programs, the class size, the school nurse, the librarians, the books, the everything that they need. Only our collective action will do that. You have to do both. The action of eradicating institutional racism is the right and natural work of our unions, local, state, and national. And we can't do it by ourselves. It means that our unions have to be part of reaching out to parents and the civil rights community and the faith community and the agnostic atheist community. Don't let anyone off the hook. Everybody has a piece of this. It's our unions, it's you, it's me, it's the people in this room right now who are saying, I already see it. Now I want to do something about it. We have to find ways. We have to find ways, and it is a core piece of our mission. We have to seek the truth. We have to become informed. And if you stop at being informed, if you stop at the information that you get in this conference and you go, wow, that was totally interesting, and you don't do anything with the information you receive, with the challenge that you will make then we didn't actually make a difference. Why are we here? I've had people who have said, you know, Lily, there's already laws. There's already laws, federal laws, that prohibit discrimination, racial discrimination. So it's against the law to tell a black child that she can't take calculus. It's against the law to punish someone because you don't like that they have a hijab. It's against the law to expel a student based on their race. So they have all the protections that, that they need, and it's always they, the person that's telling me this. And no. It's one thing to tell a student she has a right to take calculus, but they don't offer calculus in her school. Right. It is another thing to say that you have a right to a good education, but you don't have a counselor. You don't have a school nurse. You come to school hungry. It's one thing to say there's nothing legal about discriminating against a student, but you know the thousands of ways that our students and our communities face discrimination. There's just not a law like we had before Brown versus the board. The only way to cure systemic intentional racism is systemic intentional justice. You have to act to say, why doesn't every school in Washington state look like our best public schools? Go find those public schools, and you know where they are. Drive through the McMansions, there they are. And say, let's take an inventory of the art, the music, the school nurse, the librarian, the technology, the programs, the language classes. That is our standard. And now we're going to go to every school in Washington state and we're going to hold it up. Do you have a librarian? Do you have books in your library? What's your technology like? What's your broad array of classes that will get you into a college? And when someone gives you a reason why these schools don't need it or deserve it, or it's just too expensive, it's racist. There is no reason that we have a system that gives children in this community more than children in that community, and that community is always a community of color. So we have to be informed and we have to act. The first thing you act is you accept the truth, that it exists, that it is based on a white supremacist culture that invaded us and that we must all fight against. You act to join forces. You don't try and solve it in one school or one district or even one union. You reach out to people you know love those students and love the community as much as you do. And you make sure that everybody sees this as their patriotic duty. As their patriotic duty. This is the most urgent issue. The kids entering first grade this year get 1 year to be a first grader. This is not for another generation. This is here, and this is now. And I have to believe that you decided to come into a room like this today on a beautiful Saturday because you believe in a mission. And our mission has to be to create a new normal. The new normal is the word all. When we say all our students, we mean every blessed one of them. We want a new normal that honors, respects, and loves all our students, a love for their common humanity, a love for the rich diversity that is a gift to all of us. New histories, cultures, languages, traditions. That's what the ideal of America has always been said and never realized. So we all truly become that community that begins where? Where a child first comes together with the neighbors in that public school, that place to learn, that place to grow, that place to imagine the lives that will make them happy. This is our mission. And this is my daily prayer, that we will become worthy of all who are depending on us to make real the American ideal that we pledge allegiance to. May we be worthy of the mission that we are being called on. Mil gracias por este honor, hermanos y hermanas. Thank you.